And so, yeah, if you have any questions in the course of this, please do ask them. Obviously, you can ask them at the end as well. Feel free to make notes. I know this is going online, so you don't necessarily have to do that, but it might be you might save yourself some time if you write stuff down, because this is going to come thick and fast, and you will forget most of it unless you've got a really amazing brain. So, hopefully some of this stuff you're going to find valuable. It is on a kind of fairly broad array of topics, but it's all essentially stuff that people came up with when I asked them what would be the kind of top tip. So this is from a guy called Antonio Olmos, who works a lot for The Guardian and The Observer mainly. And it's kind of an accident that this is the first one in a way, but sorry, it's all right. Antonio's first, is that not working?
We have a
okay. Tony's first tip is be good at portraits. It is the one aspect of editorial photography that is still commissioned widely. The days when photographers were sent all over the world to cover news are gone, but portraits are still being commissioned on a regular basis. No matter what kind of photography you want to practice, being good at portraits will make it easier to make a living. This is incredibly important. It seems like a simple point. It is a simple point, but it's very true. Tony's been shooting portraits, extensively, along with other things, but he's made a huge percentage of his living. I would think he would agree with that, over the last 20 years or so, by shooting portraits, editorial portraits. If you get good at shooting portraits, you will earn a living, probably. There's no certainties, obviously. And the people who have earned a living consistently over a long period of time are quite often just really top-notch portrait photographers. So, I'd really take that one on board. Now, obviously, I know some of you are maybe interested in pursuing commercial photography. You're all probably interested in slightly different areas. Most of the people I talk to on the podcast are coming from a documentary tradition, maybe even a little bit of a fine art kind of thing where those things meet. But I think the advice is pretty much universal, as with this particular piece of advice. Manage and protect your archive. One thing I've learned is that you don't know which of your photographs will be valuable in the future. About a quarter of my income is from reselling photographs from my archive, and every year this source of income is growing. So that means captioning and keywording your photographs after every shoot, backing things up regularly without fail, making sure your photographs are on the same picture library and that your own archive is Google searchable so that people can find those photographs you have. Portraits of not so famous people can become extremely valuable in the future. I have a friend who did a wonderful portrait of a Harvard student who was elected as law school president. As with all jobs, he took the commission seriously, and 2 decades later the student was elected president of the United States, Barack Obama. He's made over $50,000 just from licensing that one photo. I have another friend who started photographing the local bands in his small town in Washington State as a project. One of those bands, Nirvana, became super famous, and when Kurt Cobain died, his photographs made him almost $500,000 because he was almost the only one who had photos of Nirvana and Cobain when they started. So my message is your archive is your pension. Take care of it and it will take care of you. I mean, to sort of have that tip right at the beginning of your career, I think is just incredibly valuable because, some of us, no names, are guilty of not doing this. And especially those of us who sort of, live through the transition from film to digital, and half your archive is in boxes of negatives, and the other half is suddenly on the computer, and things get messy if you don't pay attention. Now, obviously some of you maybe are still interested in shooting film, but regardless of whether you're shooting on film or digitally, this is a fantastically important thing, because if you get in the habit of doing it right from the start and have a workflow, which maybe is something that Holger covers here in the school, it will absolutely pay dividends. It's just basic kind of professional practice, and I think the people who pay attention to that are probably, I'm sure, very glad that they do, and those people who don't pay attention to that, I'm sure, definitely regret not having been more organised. So establish a great workflow for keeping tabs on your archive and knowing where everything is and all that business. Don't be late with anything. Replying to emails, sending invoices, meetings, shoots, delivery of photographs, taking the picture, anything. If you leave a reply over 2 hours, some clients will try someone else. Things move too quickly for tardiness. That's from Matt Stewart, who's a very well-known street photographer mainly. Some of these I'll comment on. Some of them will really just be sort of self-explanatory. On a very different topic, Adam Hinton. I would say that one of the key concerns for photojournalists these days is the potential to end up being a tool in the machinery of fake news narratives. The mainstream media has always played an important role in laying down the ideological groundwork to ensure general compliance with Western goals, especially in foreign policy. In our current climate, this has been taken to new levels, and imagery plays a vital role in the manipulation of events to fit these state narratives. Adam's quite interested in politics, as you can probably tell. I think this is a piece of advice that is actually much more universal to photographers in all areas, not just people involved in photojournalism and editorial photography. It is really just a message to sort of be smart about how your pictures are being used, how they're being read, how they're being perceived. Think about these things. They are incredibly important.
If you have ambitions of being a creative, professional photographer, I suggest you be brave and keep the faith.
That's Brian Griffin, who's a famous, well-known British photographer. All of these people have appeared on the podcast, by the way, so you can look them all up and Google them. If you do not know who these people are, make a note of their names and do find out. It's incredibly, incredibly important to know who people are, to know who's gone before you, to know who's done the work well and who you're going to be following in the footsteps of, People like Brian Griffin, these guys are kind of, and when I say guys, I'm using that in a non-gender specific way, are incredibly, important, in their world, and it's really good to know the kind of work that they've done. There will be a few little audio clips. So this is from Harry Borden. It's quite long, so I'm not going to read all this out because, you can kind of see it on the screen, but I'll just sort of paraphrase what Harry said here. So the first thing he's talking about is social media and getting heavily involved in that. And, he's talking about basically people of a certain age, of a certain vintage, are not as familiar with social media as some of you guys are. It is incredibly important. He's saying he wishes he'd done it a lot sooner. We all basically now have to really take it on board and use it as an incredibly valuable kind of marketing channel to get your work out into the world. He's also talking about switching formats. So, from square to 10 by 8 to, kind of 3 by 2 or whatever. And he was really talking about how going from large format cameras, and of course we're talking about film here, to a sort of 35mm Leica was something that brought him a lot of freedom. And how, he's saying, I think back to a session I had with Quentin Tarantino where I spent several hours with him and shot just a couple of rolls of film. I wonder now what I could have achieved on 35mm, perhaps not quite so beautifully shot, but possibly more interesting. So, experiment with different formats. He was saying about when he first came to London, he was quite skint and a little parsimonious, and to save perhaps 30 or 40 pounds, I would go on shoots without an assistant and undertake everything myself. I used to do this as well. It's insane. Don't do that. Mm-hmm. Try and get an assistant to go with you to help you do your shoot. The last thing you want to do is create more work for yourself than is necessary. I used to do that week in, week out, because I didn't really know that, I guess I don't know. I kind of knew that assistants were a thing, but that was about as far as it went. it will look better if you kind of have someone, you're going to look more professional. Hi.
Is it alright to ask questions now?
Yeah,
Or would you rather wait till the end?
That's right, isn't it, Holger?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you think, for people who are reasonably new to photography, do you think you can start assisting people really straight away, or do you need to have built up your own kind of basis of experience first?
If you want to be an assistant, you mean?
If you want to assist people in
Yeah.
shoots, if you're trying
Yeah.
to work your way up through photography.
I think as long as you have the kind of fundamentals under your belt, and then there's no reason why you can't just go straight for it. I think that there are lots of different types of assistant in a way, and there are lots of different types of photographer, and people want a different type of assistant depending on what type of photographer they are. I think it's a real mistake to assume that assisting is a particular thing. Like, some people want a sort of person who carries lots of, masking tape around, someone who's sort of got a tool belt, Some people want someone who is just another brain. I'm the kind of photographer who I don't care about, like, obviously setting up lights and all that, it's incredibly important. Obviously carrying stuff around, being a bit of a sort of jobs work, what do they call it, like dog's body. That's all cool. But I think what a lot of photographers want is someone to bounce ideas off, because, the photographer has the experience, and basically, they've got the responsibility of doing the shoot. But sometimes you want to just say to someone, "What do you reckon?" Don't think that your input isn't in some way valuable, even if you're not that experienced. If you are the sort of person who's just good with ideas and who's got a photographic brain, that's incredibly valuable. So I think it is totally fine to start assisting, whenever you can, really. And I think it's about finding the right photographer who's a fit for you as an assistant, and vice versa. That's really what it's all about, because it's about saying to that photographer, what kind of assistant do you want? What do you need? What's important to you? Some people would want you to just shut up and carry their stuff. I wouldn't personally advise you work for someone like that unless they're really, I guess, leading by example and showing you, because about assisting is really about kind of learning from observation, isn't it? If the person is amazing and you can learn a lot by watching them, then fine, why not? But it's all about finding the right fit. But yeah, it's totally fine, I think, to start whenever you can. The final point I would have made to my younger self would be to know your worth. It was difficult because I was so happy to be making a living out of what I loved doing that I didn't realise the value of my work. Eventually, some of those I worked alongside at IPG, which was an agency, pointed out to me that I owned the copyright to my pictures, and by syndicating them through Cat's Pictures, I could earn money. I also recall that I was asked by Warner Brothers to set a fee for a picture of Seal that had never been published that they wanted to use. He's one of the best-selling artists of all time, and Warner Brothers are enormous, but I think in the end I settled for just £75. That was back in the 80s, and at the time I just couldn't believe that anyone would pay decent money for my pictures, but I soon wised up to that. So it's really about, just be wise to the business side of things, and the sooner you are, the better. This is from Chloe Dew Matthews. My tip would be just do it, like the Nike advert. Don't spend weeks and months chatting about what work you plan to do, considering if it's a good enough idea, because it is in making that the work evolves. It will never be as you first envisaged it anyway, and that is a good thing. Mark Neville. One great image is worth more than 5,000 good ones. Take your time. Secondly, think about the audience first. Who is the work for? Then make your project. Thirdly, don't listen to advice from old farts like me. See, I think Mark Neville's an amazing photographer. I think that second thing about thinking about the audience first, might well be directly contradicted by other people who would say, do stuff for yourself. So I think the takeaway here is, for every one person's particular take on something, someone else will have the direct opposite take. So, this is Jane Hilton.
Hi Ben, this is Jane Hilton, and here are my top tips for your graduation students. I would say get a day job and juggle around it. You have to be prepared to do lots of different things to earn your money nowadays. But you either do that and carry on working with your projects, or possibly join a big studio like Big Sky or Spring Studios in London and become an assistant, which is hard work, but you get a weekly wage and you meet other photographers, not necessarily all fashion and advertising, but also portrait-led photography, where you can network photographers and get freelance work. It is hard work, but it's rewarding. And then I would say you would just have to keep working at what you love most. Pick your subject matters wisely, do what works for you, and keep showing people. You have to keep showing magazines, maybe not more than once. You have to go at least 4 times to show new work before they'll listen. But it should be a very rewarding thing when it all pays off. And to add to that, the other tip I could give you regarding projects and moving forward would be to give yourself a deadline and keep focused, which is always difficult, juggling so many things, especially when it's just earning a living. But if you can give yourself a deadline and focus on something in particular, it will help. I hope that works. Good luck.
This is pretty big, I think. Edward Thompson. Most students are working at about 60%. They could get up earlier, shoot more, read more, do more, hustle more. I fell into the trap post-grad of laying in now and again till a guy I knew found out he had a lump in his leg. He died soon after, leaving a wife and newborn daughter. Every morning after that I was up early, whether I had an assignment or not, because he wasn't here anymore. You are already on the greatest adventure of your life, because it's your life. So live it. Like Henri Cartier-Bresson said, all you have to do is live, and life will give you the pictures. To me, the key to making great work is not to make work just because you think people will like it or because you think it will be successful. Make work that is true to your own self. Find your own voice. Make work that speaks to you first. And then if you feel something, when you press the shutter, there is a good chance that people will feel it too when looking at the image. That's Sophie Ebrard. This is a piece of advice, I might as well tell you now, this is a piece of advice that will recur numerous times. It is the most important takeaway from this entire presentation, I think, just in terms of the number of people who say the same thing. So I guess when a lot of people say the same thing, you know that that's a kind of sign that you might want to pay attention to it. The second thing that came up a lot was be kind. Be a nice person. It's incredibly important, you know? I mean, just for everything. So that's one to also think about. But this one from Sophie is really important. Daniel Castro Garcia. Personally, I think the most vital tip is that you need to stay true to yourself and to your vision. Don't copy others and stay focused on the projects that you want to make, and try to find a balance between head and heart, potentially favouring the heart. People respond to warmth and empathy. Also, I think it's really important to be hard on yourself, particularly in the documentary realm. Often the work will be about people, individuals other than yourself, so the motivation should be to do them and their stories justice. Good morals and ethical standards must always be the aim, so you have to push and push to make the work watertight. All in all, keep it real. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So that's kind of Daniel almost kind of saying what I just introduced in a way, or partly. It's a little bit of audio from Kalpesh Lathigra.
It's interesting when people ask about what's the most important bit of advice to give young photographers. I think there's a lot to be actually said about actually behaving in a kind and considerate fashion to your fellow artists and photographers and to the rest of the community and the people you photograph. we live in a kind of world that's highly competitive within photography, certainly, and at times you can feel like you're kind of up against it. But I found that just by kind of treating other people with the kindness and being aware of how you operate within the industry, it can be a real kind of bonus to keeping your psychological health well. So I think my kind of main bit of advice is, treat others as you treat yourself, and also don't forget the people who kind of help you on the way up, because when you're falling down a little while, there'll be the people who catch you and help you along the way.
There's a guy called Daniel Regan. It really makes me think of the Anthony Burrell screen print I have in my house with the slogan, "Work hard and be nice to people." A lot of my work has come from being nice, supporting others instead of competing against them. At university, I thought of other students as my peers, not competitors. I prefer to share resources rather than hoard them, because it means we all get more opportunities. Being laser focused on arts and health means I don't mind working hard, because it's something I love. Interesting guy, Daniel. You can hear him on the podcast. This is from Chris Floyd, top-notch portrait photographer, one of the aforementioned guys who's been earning a good living for 20 odd years, partly by being good at portraits. 1. There is always one more thing you can do to improve your chances of a positive outcome. So find a moment to stop when you're in your situation and ask yourself, what can I do here to make this better? Yeah, I mean that's a great tip when it comes to being in portrait sessions and stuff, and sometimes your brain kind of goes into neutral, and it's very good to be able to just do that, really take a breath and think about to yourself how can you improve the situation. Treat every experience and every shoot you do as an opportunity to make mistakes from which to learn something. Take the long view. When you end up with results that you are not happy with, think of it as another step on the road to the palace of wisdom. Only by making mistakes do we in the long run acquire wisdom and experience. Also, people who've never made mistakes are boring. 3. Photography is not necessarily an end in itself. In fact, most of the time it's a tool by which to understand and learn from the people with which we use it to engage. Think of photography as your ever-present teacher. Treat it with respect and it will return unto you infinitely. 4. F4 is a beautiful aperture. I suppose it depends what size camera you're using, really. 5. According to Albert Einstein, the speed of light is the only constant in the entire universe. Your role as a photographer is to disrupt that. 6. When you have the opportunity to change batteries, do it. Charge batteries or change batteries, same thing. 7. Think of photography as music. It has melody, harmony and rhythm. The way you light and compose your picture is the chord structure, and your interaction with the subject is the melody. I think that's a lovely analogy that Chris has got. I think he talked about that on the podcast a bit. 8. Never leave the arm of a C-stand at head height. I once saw someone lose an eye because of that. Look around your immediate working environment. Ask yourself if you have made it as safe as possible. I don't even know what a C-stand is. This is Peter Zaleski. He's kind of street photography or street portraiture specialist in a way. Whenever I'm asked to give one piece of photography advice to aspiring photographers, I always say, make sure that you try your best to always make photographs that mean something to you, because in doing so you will find they will almost always mean something to others. This may seem like obvious and cliched advice, but I feel that as soon as a photographer starts making unique, meaningful and personal work that reflects something they are genuinely interested in, that is when their journey as a successful photographer truly begins. So that's an echo of Sophie Eberhard's point and the thing that I was talking about before, really. This is the kind of the absolute kind of takeaway, if you want one takeaway from the whole thing. This is Mimi Malika.
As usual, it's beautiful to talk to you. You're great, and what you're doing with a small voice is fantastic. As far as the tips, I would say, work hard. Look at as many work as you can. Be strong, and remember that it's all about your perspective. Now, I'll go through each of these points. Work hard. There's nothing that you can achieve without working hard. There's no cutting corners. Nothing will fall from the sky for you. You have to go and grab it, and you have to work hard, and then more hard. So there's no holidays, there's no weekend, there's no priorities other than working hard on your stuff. Look at as many photographers as you can. Be curious. Look at the work that many photographers before you have done. Get inspiration, but don't copy, of course, and try to stay original. Because if you do not open your mind and look at what has been done before and around you, you will never conquer that kind of satisfactory or how can I say, that kind of comprehensive vision of the industry that you are approaching for your career. So you have to study a lot of books, buy a lot of books, borrow a lot of books, go to libraries, go to bookshops, go to festivals. You have to be in the arena. Otherwise, you would be closed in your own little world and will not be aware of what's going on. Then be strong, because there is a lot of times where you can get depressed, where you can get discouraged, where you are not satisfied with what you do, when you don't sell, or you don't win that competition, or you don't get appreciated. And try to treasure the critiques that come towards you, because it's always better to hear a constructive, although negative, critique on your work than just a good pat on the shoulders. Pat on the shoulders have never helped anyone. A true, insightful, thorough review of your work, even if it's not all nice and sweet and pinky, whatever you want to call it, is going to be that advice that will make you think and will make you progress to the next stage. So be strong always whenever these kind of discouragements, or not discouragements, but kind of big hit comes. Because, these are the most useful thing that you can get in your career, really. And then lastly, remember that this is all about your perspective. Photography is nothing but showing your perspective to the world that you see and you experience to other people. So it's about finding a twist, finding an original story, finding a personal story, and offering your own perspective through that. Now, photography is a massive world like the ocean. There is portraiture, there is news, there is family photography, there is fine art, there is commercial, advertising. The world is yours. Just go out there and grab it. And then I think that's it. Enjoy it, most of all, because it's a beautiful journey. Ciao!
Kate Peters, don't be in a rush to be an overnight success. There seems to be so much pressure for people to make it really quickly, and in a way it may seem like everyone else is. Social media has warped our sense of what's really going on for people, and that has had a tendency to make us feel anxious and rush to get things out there. Be in it for the long haul. You don't want to burn out quickly, and you also don't want to release work before it's ready to be seen. Maya Daniels. My best advice would perhaps be for everyone to really get their head around the history of photography in relation to depicting the other through studying post-colonial theory. Sounds a little boring, but so important to understand how photography has been and still is actively used as an oppressive tool. And then to try to think beyond this, perhaps think about what a photograph does rather than what it represents. Also, I think photography is about desire. Let that desire lead you. So I guess Maya's talking kind of mainly in terms of perhaps documentary photography and photojournalism, but again, I think really it's universally applicable to any type of photography, really, that you've got to be aware of these things. It's very similar to that previous point. Bryony Campbell. Chase every single opportunity as long as it does at least one of the following. 1. Enhances your portfolio. 2. Builds your skills. 3. Lines your pockets. 4. Contributes to a valuable cause. 5. Is fun. And none of the following. 1. Compromises your ethics. 2. Exploits you financially. That doesn't mean don't do work for free. 3. Exploits you personally. So that's that. There's a lot of really good wisdom in that little piece of advice when you look at those things on the list. And I think when she talks about, there's a difference between doing things for free and getting exploited financially. You can do things for free without being exploited. It depends what the transaction is. What are you getting back and all that. There are unfortunately increasingly millions of people out there who will screw you over quite happily in order to get what they want, which is basically a picture that you've taken or the use of a picture and anything like that. This is unfortunately prevalent in these times, and you have to be wary, and you have to protect yourself and defend yourself against that. There are times when you will do things for free because you're getting something else out of that transaction. Be aware of that. Here's Peter Dench.
Hello, I'm Peter Dench. Being a modern image maker is an incredibly exciting time at the moment, with many new and evolving ways to get your work seen. I would advise emerging or aspiring photographers to develop a wide skill set, to trust their instincts. If you're excited enough to photograph something, the chances are there's an audience interested enough to see it, and have a clear objective and vision to cling on to if times get tough, because inevitably they will. Good luck and enjoy the ride.
This is Ian Derry, who, Ian's a very successful commercial photographer, but also has his own sort of personal practice, which increasingly involves shooting moving imagery and sort of high-end video now. It goes without saying that you need to thoroughly understand what you're doing, but in this day and age it can be tough out there. Have a goal and then plan how you're going to get there. There will be setbacks and times when you will want to give up. When you are at that point, remember this: if the plan doesn't work, change the plan, never the goal. Lydia Goldblatt. Hello all you hard-working MA students or other students. My top tip would be to make sure that you continue to develop a group of like-minded people around you, ideally a handful of people who you feel understand your work and can engage with it both positively and critically. Every time you embark on a project, a portfolio update, even a commission, it's so useful to have a support network of people like this around you, with whom you can, when needed, brainstorm, discuss work and show work. It's also great when you're going through those periodic and inevitable uncertain patches when you're not sure where you're headed. I hope this helps, and good luck everyone for your graduation show. So yeah, that's incredibly important. I think I think a lot of us talk about how being a photographer can be a very isolating experience. Although you're quite often working with other people during shoots, there's a lot of times when you're just sitting around, staring at your computer and stuff, and it can be really, it is, as Lydia points out, incredibly valuable to have a little, group of close friends or colleagues or, people who maybe you just share an office space with, to bounce ideas off and go for beers and coffees with, and hopefully not indulge in too much displacement activity, but to actually talk kind of about these things that you're interested in. Max Pinkers. What I essentially try to teach my students is to always remain critical towards the work you make. Be self-reflexive in your approach, question everything, and embrace doubt and uncertainty as part of the process. Do plenty of research, try to be informed, but aim for complete freedom in your artistic expression. This is Anush Babajanyan, who is a documentary photographer. She's with the Seven Agency.
So I say this often, but it's never really enough to repeat. One of the most important things for us to ever keep in mind is confidence. Not just confidence out of nowhere, but knowing who you are and working with that in mind. Never putting yourself down and never thinking too much of yourself either, but knowing and recognizing your powers, your abilities, and working with that in mind and with that giving you power. There will be people who will do that to you, who will not believe in you, who will not be too sure if you can do this, if you can be that photographer. But make sure that you are not that person. Make sure that when you look in the mirror, you know who you are. And that's very important.
This is from Jenny Lewis, who's going to be teaching here or running a mentoring workshop. Is that right, Holger? She's going to.
Yeah, that's right. That's masterclass up there.
That's Jenny there.
11th of November.
If you photograph something you really believe in, you're going to take much stronger pictures. So always try and have that going on, even if it's in the background to the work you get paid for. That way, you don't lose sight of what it is you're trying to do with image making. Try and remember to enjoy it too. So Jocelyn Bain-Haag, very experienced photojournalist and documentary photographer. 1, get a good accountant. That's it. That's all he has to say about that. I think that is very important. Or, I mean, you could learn to do your own accounts, as some people do, but it is important to keep your get your head around all that stuff, or get someone who's good at it. 2, it's obvious but essential to be comfortable when shooting, and my choice is to invest in R.M. Williams boots. Unisex, they double as posh, so they can be worn as smart footwear when doing those delightful corporate jobs, but they work with any other clothing too. Are great in harsh environments, and city streets too, are incredibly comfortable and last forever when looked after, so you only need a replacement every 15 to 20 years. The whole advice around footwear is actually, there is quite a lot of advice around footwear when it comes to photographers. It seems to be a bit of a sort of fixation for some people. Get a good pair of shoes, guys. Sean Davey, well, boringly perhaps it is to work very hard, because if you don't practice, your work doesn't develop, and neither will your career. Voila. Let's listen to Maggie Stever. Maggie's incredibly experienced, very esteemed documentary photographer. Been doing it for a long time, seen it all, done it all.
Hello, this is Maggie Steber in the United States. The best advice I can offer any photography student is to always do as much research as possible, and then go into the situation or the country or the society that you're photographing like a baby, and learn at the knees, so to speak, of the people you are photographing, because you're trying to tell their stories, and no matter how many books you read or what kind of research you do, you will never learn as much as you will from the people you're photographing. So go in as though you know nothing and learn from them so you get it right. The other piece of advice I would give is to always be kind and generous, because in this business, it's not just about taking great photography. It's not just that. It's how you behave, how you treat other people, including photographers and especially photo editors, who are the unsung heroes and who give us work and who make us look good or bad. And finally, I would say that ideas, more than almost anything else, are the things that will propel you forward. So those are sometimes hard to come by, but if you pay attention to the news and what's going on in the world, and even if you look at the work of other people and you find a new way to tell an old story, then you'll probably be okay. Good luck.
This is Ed Cashy, another photojournalist, colleague of Maggie's, or ex-colleague of Maggie's. Your greatest work will come from within you. You must identify what you care about and pursue personal projects on what you care about. Regardless of whether you have to invest your own time and money at the beginning, this is about investing in yourself. So that, I guess, again, is another echo of that, of a variant of that same piece of advice, which is essentially around making work that matters to you, or shooting things that, you know, resonate with you in some way, doing personal work. And I think that applies, you know, for people who have aspirations to shoot commercial work. You know, I think it's equally valuable advice to them too. This is Giles Dooley. 2 things really. Don't make photographs because you think it's what others want to see. Shoot what you love, what you are passionate about, what you know. Listen. It may be a strange thing to say to a photographer, but to really capture somebody's story, you must listen to it first. Too many photographers turn up and meet the person looking through the viewfinder. They already think they know what the image will be. For me, that's wrong. I have to listen first, understand the story, then maybe I'll find a way to tell it. Again, I mean, Giles is coming at it from a sort of photojournalist point of view, but I think, you know, in terms of of any subject who's in front of the lens, for whatever reason, it's the same principle, I think, you know, and there's always a story, you know, there's always a narrative, regardless of whether you're talking about documentary photography or, you know, or some kind of commercial shoot. You know, there's always a story behind it, and I think you have to sort of figure out what that is. This is Alex Vazina. My advice to students studying documentary photography is always to be concerned with the content. Lots of people take beautiful pictures, and we see thousands each day. When we see photographs on a wall or in a print, what we really remember is the story. So, as a advice, do you find yourself sort of repeatedly giving to young photographers, or what kind of advice are they looking for?
Well, they're generally a bit lazy. They generally don't work hard enough. They generally try to get a book published before it's even ready, because they haven't really resolved the thing that's unique to that body of work. That's the danger of photography. It looks very easy to produce work that, you know, may look good on one level, but hasn't got the soul that really it needs to have to make it work. And the thing with photography, it's so easy to do and yet so difficult to actually do, and that's the thing that confounds people. And many of the books that we see now published aren't really resolved. There is nothing particularly fresh or new added in. So you can tell pretty immediately by looking at a book or indeed a body of work how much effort has been invested in that. And I'm looking for people that really have put themselves out. That's the general quality that I'm looking out for, more than anything else, in fact. And the fact that they've got something to say through those images and their connection to the world.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's another work hard message, isn't it? You know, don't be lazy. That's basically his takeaway. So that's, I guess, the other one that's really emerging from this, really, isn't it? The work hard message. If you add that into the be kind and to the shoot work that you like, then, you know, then the world is your lobster, as they say. Mm-hmm. This is Muir Vidler. Keep looking at lots of photography for inspiration, thinking what it is that you like in it and how do people do it, and ask yourself not how can you copy it, but how can your appreciation of their talent and originality help in your search for your own. Chris Thorley Brown. Always turn into the direction of the skid, like the old driving instructor advice, which is to say sometimes the way out of danger is to question your immediate instinct and don't go for the obvious strategy, or follow your guts, not your head. Also, be silly, be kind, be weird. Take from that what you will, from Chris's advice about turning into the skid. I think it's an interesting analogy and one that could be interpreted in a number of ways. This is advice from Ron Haviv, very esteemed photojournalist. There's a pretty simple yet very complicated tip. One must think outside the box in their approach to any story. We have all been told everything has already been done and there is nothing new. But I don't agree. We see today's stories about human rights or with conflict themes that have been documented for generations being done in an outside-of-the-box way. The thought behind the visual approach and execution of an established theme in a new way is the way to successful impact with the audience. Okay, this is from Robin Maddock. Looking back on my time, I would say the most important thing I've learnt is that you should listen to all your tutors but decide carefully whose advice to apply. I remember doing a master's at Westminster and showing a new project that involved pasting stuff up on the street. I loved doing it. It felt vital and direct, fresh. This was 1998. One of the tutors said, "It's not good, this kind of thing," and bombarded me with examples of work he thought was good. The end result was I lost confidence in this way of working, which I shouldn't have. I mean, I could have been famous like Banksy or JR by now. The upshot is some tutors are just never going to get what you are trying to bring forth, and others will change your life in just one lecture. So think carefully before you lose belief in your early ideas. Trust in those teachers who can help you bring out, not hinder, the ways that feel right to you. You will need their wisdom and experience to grow ideas into something of quality and maturity, but don't let bad advice hold you back either. I regret not being experienced enough at the time to shake off what I can now see as a lack of vision on the tutor's part. This is really interesting. I mean, by definition, of course he wasn't experienced enough, because that's why he was the student and the tutor was the tutor. And I think I think back to times when I was studying photography, very, very similar situation, with people who I now think back and think, oh my God, why did I listen? Why did I think that person knew more than I did? Because I think back and go, that was just wrong, But it's important to bear this in mind, and it's good for you guys to sort of hear this at the stage you're at, really. I mean, obviously, if someone's talking to you and has hugely more experience than you have, then you totally have to listen and respect what they have to say. But always have that little voice in your head going, is that right? Do I really think that?
I'm only talking about one thing when it comes to mentoring students, which I've been doing since I was a kid, basically. I've been mentoring people since I was a student myself when I was about 21 or 22. And it's really always been the same thing, because I realized early on that photographers, artists of all kinds, musicians, writers, painters, filmmakers, photographers, reporters, such as yourself, you distinguish yourself only one way, and that is by having a point of view and by having some sense of authorship. So that's the only thing that I try to get across to people, is to have them, break down a little bit, break down their own barriers, and look in the mirror as much as they possibly can, and face their fear, face their freedom, because freedom is a scary thing when you get it, because you suddenly don't know what you think, many, many, many adults. So that's what I try to get to. I try to get them to actually have a sense of freedom and face their fear and be themselves, which sounds easy, sounds like what everybody wants, but it's the hardest thing for people to do.
This is Donald Webber. Think like an amateur and make sorties into the terrain of the professional. Amateur means just that, doing something that you love. This needs to be front and centre over anything else. Discard the recognition the industry so badly needs you to conform to. Instead, carve out your own space in your own image. Let's not confuse amateur with someone who is a dilettante, unprofessional. No, an amateur is someone who finds joy, love in what they do. Perhaps the best way to condition yourself as an amateur is to look at its etymology. Amateur is the Latin for lover. Don't you want to do something that you love, that fulfills you, that provides meaning? To me, the world of possibility is open. I can drift across disciplines and collaborate with others. I can engage with institutions and challenge their power. The freedom to work outside the constricted norms provides sudden portals for a future I could never imagine. Do what you love. Others will want to participate. Opportunities emerge. Stuart Frieden. I think there are several bits of advice. I think that people will only survive in this business with persistence bordering on bloody-mindedness. I think that's important, especially for MA graduates, to be able to produce work that appeals to a wide audience and not just theoreticians. Hopefully, that will work. That will be work that's personally important, because otherwise you're wasting your time. Lastly, I suggest an income stream in an area of scarcity. Technical lighting, taking pictures of dogs, or being an expert on somewhere remote and interesting, and probably basing yourself there. yeah, I think that thing of developing, a potential second kind of income stream, a kind of expertise, incredibly good advice for you guys at the sort of, beginning stages of your careers, because as I think you'll probably hear ad nauseum, earning a living is not by any means guaranteed. It's increasingly difficult, and maybe you want something else going on there, so Stuart's suggesting a very specific thing, but it doesn't really matter whatever it is. It could be your side hustle, if you like, but if you have other things going on in your lives that could potentially be another revenue stream, then I would definitely spend time and energy developing that, because if you can get that going on, then maybe if the photography isn't going so great, then you sort of fall back on that, and then it's just that whole thing, that portfolio lifestyle thing is increasingly, I think, the way to go in the world that we're now living in, and having multiple revenue streams, none of which on their own will provide a full living, but which collectively will add up to one, is super useful if that is of interest to you as an idea. Gillian Edelstein. Gillian's quite a well-known, primarily portrait photographer. There are a few tips that I learned early on, and they have always been present to remind me, to drive me on. 1. You're only as good as your last good image. Keep working, get out there. The more you work, the better your images get. It's the practicism. Like any good creative, musicians, writers, artists, actors, etc., keep practicing. 2. The first newspaper picture editor I worked for told me not to come back with excuses. He was a bit like a military commander in how he trained me, but that advice, even though it was galling, banal, was true. 3. Another photo editor, after many years of being a successful to-boot freelancer, told me when I struggled with a particular portrait shoot, "Geez, Gillian, talk about breaking the boundaries of portraiture." His sarcasm and the fact that it was painfully true, I had failed even in my own book, made me think about how to think more creatively and how to do it differently with every shoot long after I completed the actual job. Also 4, for your own projects you need fire in the belly, passion, long-standing, endlessly driving passion to see it through. Nothing I have created that has been worthwhile has taken less than 5 years. Okay, right, well, we're coming to the end. Let me give you these 20 no less tips from Vanessa Winship. Vanessa, I hope some of you will know Ness's work. She's an old friend of mine. She's, kind of very highly regarded. 1, know who has gone before you. Be sure to understand that you're not the first and that someone else has made the way for you easier. They may have said it a bit differently, but they will have said it nevertheless. It's kind of the point I was making earlier. 2, learn quickly who you are right now. Not easy and not sure I do, so kind of telling you to do something almost impossible, I guess. 3, know and understand your limitations, including understanding fear is a survival instinct. Nevertheless, feel the fear and question what it's about. 4, understand that photography and reality are 2 different things. You're making a representation. 5, understand that there's a before and an after, despite the fact your frame suggests otherwise. 6, understand photography is intrinsically connected to death. It's always the past the second you press the button, and yet paradoxically, it's always about now. 7, consider what you mean by ethics. If you go and work away from home, understand cultural codes are different according to where you are. Follow the best you can the codes of where you are, but understand they will look different once you're home sometimes. 8, question your liberal sensibilities. Don't assume that all Trump voters are racists, that they are not necessarily, that are all just fed up of not being listened to. 9, the camera never lies, you do. 10, remember photography is limited and find a way to extend its limitations. 11, be willing to change your mind. 12, remember you're an animal that usually stands on 2 legs, crouch down and kneel sometimes, lie on the floor and feel how that is looking up from ground level. 13, walk quite a bit, but it won't make you live longer despite what they say. 14, be kind. 15, laugh at least once a day so your face doesn't crack. 16, learn to dance since photographers rarely do. 17. Enjoy the word lolly, since you'll never have any, but that's not the point of what you do anyway. Lolly means money, in case any of you are not familiar with that particular British piece of vernacular. 18. Go slow, stand still once in a while. 19. Send postcards to the oldest and the youngest person you know. They will love you for it. 20. A wonderful man in a shop where I live, who I like to go talk to now and again, said, "You know, it's easy really, just be kind to people and it will all fall into place." Christopher Anderson, my advice is simple: be yourself. Very, very important. Easily forgotten. And this is advice from me. If advice from others was the answer, we'd all be billionaires with perfect abs. That is all I've got for you, folks. I hope that was of value.
It was, thank you.
Anyone got any questions before we finish?
I've got a question, of course. So I know that you gave your piece of advice last year. I mean, obviously there are lots of different pieces of advice out there. How about you? Like, I think I think you can get quite easily you can get absorbed into getting advice, basically. But I think ultimately, what you also have to be really quite selective, right? I mean, we've listened to so many pieces of advice. Some of them seem to have been repeated. Some of them are very fresh and new and unique. How about you? I mean, what have you taken away from having met some of the most amazing photographers on the planet?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I'm still in that process really, and I'm still constantly thinking about these things. I mean, and I've made all sorts of incredible learnings from actually doing the podcast. In terms of just the process of putting myself in that position of kind of vulnerability and starting something completely new. But I mean, I think that the takeaways from this are quite often the ones that stick with me. So I think that thing about doing stuff that really matters to you is important, and being kind, and being generous. I know that it's kind of cheesy, but I think that's incredibly important. Work ethic, again came up a lot, but a lot of these people are just quietly productive, quietly get on with what they do, and they're kind of very focused. And I think it's incredibly important to try and develop that skill really, or that talent for just keeping your eyes on the prize. And you've got to be a bit of a sort of Terminator. Nothing will stop you, but you can move slowly. What's that old Confucius? It doesn't matter how slowly you go as long as you never stop. And most of these people, I think, even the youngsters who are sort of starting out, I think they've very much got an awareness that they're in it for the long haul. And the ones who have already done the long haul are still in that mindset. So that's very important. But yeah, I mean, there's loads of those. I mean, I think you made a really incredibly important point there, which is that, of course, you could never possibly bear all those things in mind. I think the thing is to pull out the things that just resonate with you, and just focus on those things that will just maybe you'll go home tonight and remember certain of those pieces of advice. You couldn't possibly follow all of those things, but we all have to kind of as Christopher Anderson said, be yourself, and part of that process is to know, or to start to think about what is important to you, and who the hell are you? Who am I, and what is my ethos, and what are the things that will matter. And then from knowing who you are, you will start to realise the kind of advice that's going to matter to you, and the kind of people and the kind of work that you want to aspire to do.
Yeah, I guess what really seems to unite all those famous photographers is that they seem to have an incredibly good awareness of what what they actually want and who they are. Let's say, you know, if you read maybe an article with an artist, with a musician, then they're incredibly aware of what actually made them, like what were those key stages maybe in their career.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, ultimately, like they seem to be incredibly confident in terms of deciding what is right for them and what is not. And I think, I mean, ultimately, and you know, that doesn't sound pathetic, but ultimately, what we're doing all the time is actually finding out who we are, I guess, really. So really digging deep and seeing like, okay, what does actually matter to us? Because the moment you have actually found this out, you have found your path.
Yeah.
So finding this element, like, what are you, what actually does matter to you, that's what it's all about. The moment you have found an answer, maybe even a temporary answer, because obviously you change,
Yeah, of
and
course.
who you are, and the path is going to change with you.
Yeah.
Even if you found a temporary answer, you know which path to take, I guess. No?
Exactly, yeah, and I think that's important because it is a continual process, and it's, you know, it's like, I think like you say, the answer changes as time goes on, and you know, you never stop kind of looking for that answer. So it's not like one should think of it in terms of some kind of ultimate goal, and then when you reach that goal, it's like the Holy Grail or something. You know, you should be process driven, not goal driven, in the sense that, you know, your process is what kind of work do I want to do, you know, what matters, what doesn't, where am I going to put my energies, and then, you know, and then just pursue that thing, and then maybe, you know, at some point you're going to change your mind about everything, and you're going to maybe do a massive, you know, right turn or left turn or whatever, you know, you might. There are all kinds of different ways in which things might change. You might end up working, you know, in a different area within photography. You might, you know, experiment with different media. You know, you might decide to move into trying a bit of video or whatever. It's part of the process, and it's, you know, it all adds to ultimately to your kind of understanding of who you are.
Good. Anyone, any further questions?
Yes. How did you start the podcast then?
That's another hour. No, it's a good question. I'm glad you asked, because it's I'm sure I can give a short answer. I started listening to podcasts for the first time. I was aware of them, obviously. You know, I mean, podcasting it's been around quite a while, but certainly 4 years ago it wasn't something that was part of my kind of daily life, and certainly, you know, for a lot of people it still isn't. But I discovered them and kind of fell in love with the medium in a way, and fell in love with certain particular podcasts. I always mention WTF with Mark Maron, which was what my first sort of love. You know, some of you might not have a clue what that is or who that is, but I thought, well, maybe there's photography podcasts out there, and I sort of started searching on the iTunes list or whatever, and I found a couple, but then it was like, it was not quite what I was looking for, and then I sort of well, maybe not inevitably, but unfortunately for me, inevitably came to the conclusion that there was only one person to do the podcast that I wanted to listen to, and that was me. And so I was like, oh no, now I've got to do it. Oh no, I'm not sure I really want to do that. And you know, it was just a kind of, it was a decision to, you know, that thing about scratching your own itch. I thought, well, I'm going to just do the podcast I want to listen to, and I figured I'd probably, you know, just about had the right skill set to not suck at it, you know, initially, because I going back 1,000 years, I've got a degree in radio and TV production, and you know, I've got a journalistic instinct, you know, I've got a very curious kind of nature. So all these little factors kind of came together, kind of confluence of things, and I thought, I probably just need to do this. And so, and you know, I knew some good photographers, you know, so you know, I was able to you know, go to my mates initially and say, right, look, I'm doing this thing. Will you sit down and talk with me? And it all just happened from there, really. That's the short answer. The long answer takes way longer.
Do you sometimes
go ahead.
Do you sometimes struggle to arrange maybe an appointment with a photographer? Are there some like that just like I don't respond?
Yeah, I mean it's a constant process because the first thing you realise is it ain't ever going to end. So you've kind of created a problem for yourself because you've got to feed the monster. And I guess that's the case with anyone who produces anything or creates anything. It doesn't stop until they put you in the ground. So I have a constant sort of process of approaching people and emailing people and then setting things up. And I get anxious if I haven't got a few in the can. Which sometimes I don't have. Initially, I tried to do it. I did do it every week for a number of months, and that was really quite intense. And I realised it was just going to be untenable because it was too much work. So now I do one every other week, every second week, which is perfect, sustainable, not too onerous, and basically I have a list, which constantly changes, and people get ticked off it, and people suggest people, and it's just that kind of keep it kind of ticking over thing. But yeah, people are hard to pin down. People are, inevitably often travelling and that kind of thing, and so it's just a question of being patient and being kind of incredibly respectful and coming at it from a position of being mindful of people's time, of course, because I found that to be, it goes back to the bloody being kind thing again. I found that to be incredibly valuable to just come at it from that position of kind of respecting them and their work, and through to the actual execution and to the chat where I've, it's sometimes a photographer I don't know at all, and I've done a lot of research, and so people appreciate that you've made that effort, so that's just how I've always done it, and that's worked for me. But yeah, it's a constant process of trying to figure out who to get in touch with, and it's getting easier now because people know it. So so much easier now because a lot of people have already come across it one way or
another. Do you think interviewing so many photographers has had an impact on your own personal photographic work?
Yes, massively. It has. I might have quit by now if I hadn't done the podcast 4 years ago. I mean, I was having a bit of a sort of existential crisis in a way. I think it was sort of I suppose midlife crisis. I don't know. I was sort of questioning whether I should carry on pursuing photography. I was trying to work on a personal project which I've been working on for some years, which is something I'm doing here in London, sort of long-term personal project. And I think one of the reasons that I started doing it was because I felt that sense of isolation and that sense of kind of, kind of going downhill really in terms of my kind of mental health and feeling kind of depressed. And I thought, it's nice to talk to people. So I thought, well, I didn't feel part of this kind of photographic community, which, I felt I was very much outside of, and I was like, well, I've been doing this for 20 years. I don't seem to know anyone. I had a few close friends, but I thought, well, it will give myself an excuse to just approach people. You can't just phone someone up and start chatting if you don't know them. You can if you've got a podcast. You can, it's an excuse to do that. And so I just used it as an excuse to meet these people and to get inspiration from them and talk about, how they do it, because I was trying to figure that out for myself, even though I'd been, working professionally as a photographer for 20 years. I was really concerned with my personal project, and I'd never really finished anything. I was terrible at completing things, and so it was like I was sort of pretending, as I still do, to ask questions on behalf of my listener, but really I'm asking them for myself. You know, it's just a trick. It's like, yeah, what do you reckon about this? And that's still what I do to this day in a way. So it's really helped me to, like, that personal project is still, you know, it's still ongoing now, and I'm kind of getting to the end of it, and it inspired me to keep doing that. And I think that if I hadn't done the podcast, I might not have done that. So it's been really important to me in that respect.
All right.
Well, thanks for coming, folks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.